Spotify's walled garden gets smaller. From Las Vegas, the latest from our free daily newsletter at podnews.net. Spotify is stopping platform exclusivity for some of its Gimlet shows, according to a report. We're expanding our windowing strategies to increase the audiences and ad sales potential of our shows, according to a spokesperson talking to Semaphore. Traffic at the NAB show has been great. That's according to Blueberry's CEO Todd Cochran. The company moved to the Central Hall this year. The NAB show is celebrating its centennial year. ARN's iHeart Podcast Network Australia has renewed its representation deal with Audio Boom as a multi-year partnership. Podcast One has acquired 2 shows, a hit rewatch show Causing a Scene, previously known as The Net Chicks on Libsyn, and I've Had It, formerly on Podbean. Syntax has been acquired by Sentry, a code analytics product. It'll be free of paid advertising. Podcast One's stock market flotation is still on, but nobody quite knows when. Previous dates given have been January the 16th and then sometime before the end of March. Well, it's before the end of April now, and an article at the end of last week hasn't given a date. An audio drama development fund has launched in the UK. The organisers of Loop claims it's the country's first. You've until May the 19th to apply. Want to record a podcast? Live in Los Angeles? Don't have a studio set up? Can't be bothered to get into the car and drive to one? Well, the Podcast Bus reckons it's the only mobile recording studio in LA that comes to you. It's a professional recording studio inside a converted school bus. And author and activist Cory Doctorow has criticised Spotify, the BBC and Apple for operating walled gardens instead of open podcasting. Speaking on The Changelog, Doctorow criticises Apple for what he calls a deliberate piece of engineering that allows Apple to usurp the relationship between audiences and podcasters. In People News, Paul Kim at Samsung appears to have left the company. Paul was the main contact for Samsung Free's podcast service and had worked for the company for 20 years. We also hear other staff will be affected. Samsung saw its lowest profit figure for a decade earlier this month. It's a Tuesday, but still it's time for some tech stuff. Cross-app comments, a much-desired feature for podcasting, is the subject of a new proposal from Daniel J. Lewis. The proposal aims to be a simpler method of achieving cross-app comments from different services, just using a JSON file. And the proposed Podroll tag is now being supported by Podfans, a new podcast player tool. And in podcast news, Ride With Me, the ASMR cycling podcast, is a cycling podcast with a difference. The podcast captures the unique sounds of bike rides through high-quality binaural field recordings. You can already ride through Jerusalem and Girona. The Addict Experience has uncut, raw phone interviews with recovering addicts, police counsellors, family members or anyone else affected by the disease of addiction. The host, Chris, a reformed addict for 7 years, tells us that the use of phone interviews is deliberate. It makes it easier and more natural to connect with guests. Linux Matters is brand new from the people behind the 14-year-old Ubuntu podcast, which has recently completed its run. We're promised 3 experienced open source professionals bringing you upbeat and family-friendly chat about open source, technology, gaming, software development, and all the Linux matters that matter. Their email gave no explanation, however, for some rather dodgy hats being worn by the hosts. You'll find a link to that in our show notes and our newsletter at podnews.net. Code Story is kicking off Season 8 of its podcast today, interviewing startup builders about human stories and experiences in creating something from nothing. Dinky kicked off Season 3 last week, talking about the double income, no kids yet lifestyle and helping people navigate what society wants versus what's best for them. And LAists Wild returns for a new season today, with Megan Tan joining to co-host alongside Eric Galindo. It continues the story in Season 1, a partially fictionalized Southeast LA love story, which we're told is a powerful and surprising long-form story about love. Expect documentary-style conversation and cinematic fictional flashbacks. This podcast is sponsored by Podscribe. Podscribe is now IAB certified. It's the only certified measurement provider who doesn't also sell media. See what data you're missing with a no-cost campaign today at podscribe.com/blog. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.